The purpose of this video is to clarify how to use the reading and writing continuums that we've developed in the Juneau School District for elementary level kids, to use those continuums to mark the new report card. And this is going to be a challenge for all of us because it's kind of something new. I'm only going to focus on one part of the report card in my explanation, and I'm going to refer specifically to the work of one child with whom I worked during the 1999-2000 school year. So we'll use the work of that child as a model in my marking the continuum and consequently the report card. So I hope this is helpful. Okay, let's start by looking at the new report card that we'll be using this school year. And the primary report card starts off with the basic information about the child and their attendance. I want to jump down to the second part, which is most important for our purposes, which is called Progress Toward the Core, the Child Compared to District Standards. It really spells out in the report card what is being looked for here, but this takes quite a bit of analysis on your part. It says JSD has set core targets for what students should know and be able to do at the end of each grade. And that, of course, is the core content for the areas of reading, writing, and math. It says your child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content for this grade level for reading, writing, and math. You are to mark boxes for first and second trimesters only. Third trimester, rather than talking about satisfactory progress, you need to be able to state that your child has met the core content in reading, writing, or math. And that's what this is all about. Thankfully, the people who designed our report card included this little caveat that specific information is provided in the reading and writing continuum. That's pretty important because that's where we spell out when a child has actually become proficient in each of the areas that we've defined in the core as being our standards or expectations. The second part of the report card, which I won't address today, has to do with individual student growth, the child compared to himself or herself. I won't go into that part. The primary report card gives a letter grade in terms of outstanding, satisfactory, inconsistent, and unsatisfactory in each of several content areas for first, second, and third. This is not much different than what we've done in the past. But there is a big box at the bottom in which you can spell out your recommendations for interventions that might make a difference for this child in first, second, or third trimesters. So feel free to fill in that part as applies to the child. The intermediate report card is very similar to the primary. The only real difference is that in the content areas, you're assigning a letter grade of A, B, C, D, or F to the content areas that are being evaluated. There's a second page that I won't be addressing at all. So let's jump in and focus on the child's progress toward the core. I've written up a set of directions which I hope are clear for teachers to follow in using the reading and writing continua to report student progress toward the core content, which is what we're working on in the report card. If we're thinking about reading, the first thing we need to do is to gather samples or anecdotal records of student work in reading, such as running records or miscue analyses, benchmark book records, anecdotal notes, retellings, checklists, and examples of response to literature. I'm going to show you what I have. This being summer, I don't have a whole lot right now, but I have some running records on the girl with whom I worked last year, who will be my model student, and that student is named Kirsten. I'll just go over with you a few running records that I have for her for the fall of last year, because I'm going to model marking the continuum and the report card for first trimester, at the end of first trimester. What I have for Kirsten Here's a running record on a familiar book called My Shadow, which is a level 3. As I said, it's familiar, and her accuracy score was 97%. We'll come back to that later. She also gave me a reading out of a book that was familiar to her called The Farm Concert, level 5, and that's a familiar book. However, her accuracy was 89%, which makes it appear to be a little hard for her, not quite her instructional level. Notice that these are continuing over time. That was October 15th of last year. Here's a running record from October 22nd of last year of Kirsten reading Dog and Cat, which is a level 6 book at 99%, which is excellent and shows independent reading strategies, level 6. I have some running records. Remember that running records are given cold with very minimal book introductions, and it's a snapshot of the child's habituated strategies at this point. On a level 5 benchmark book, Look for Me, Kirsten read with 93% accuracy, which is instructional level. At level 6, I gave her a book out of my reading recovery test packet because she'd read all of the ones that were in the benchmark books. And this was called Dave's Tricks. At level 6 in Dave's Tricks, Kirsten read at 83%, which would be too hard for her frustration level. And that judgment was verified when she read to me on the 28th of October out of Pat's New Puppy, one of our benchmark books, level 7 at 78%, which is much too hard frustration level. Let's talk about how to mark the reading continuum. As a starting point, first consider the level at which the child is reading independently. And this is the level at which the child can self-select and read with ease, at or above a 95% accuracy score, not the level used for guided reading instruction. Find the corresponding independent reading level on the continuum using the multicolored teacher's reference guide. So I'm going to have a look here at the teacher's reference guide and think about Kirsten's reading in October of last year, which was at the end of the first trimester. At that time, I could see that she was reading some books very familiarly at level 3 and not having any trouble. There were some books in level C which she was able to read with ease, and others that were more difficult. So I would probably start by looking under column C on the reading continuum and marking those strategies which I was sure that she was confident and secure and used habitually. Let's see, so I would be starting at level C, which is here on the continuum. Before I go down that column, I want to look a little bit more carefully at Kirsten's work. When she read My Shadow to me, which was a familiar book, I noted that she reread and self-corrected a couple of times. She used structure and meaning to make predictions. She cross-checked visual information with meaning and structure, and she did reread to self-correct. When Kirsten read to me from the Farm Concert, which is level 5, which is a little difficult at 89%, I noted that she used meaning and structure. She recalled her own structure and attended to first letter visual information, but not all the way consistently. She cross-checked visual information with meaning and structure, and sometimes she ignored discrepancies, so she wasn't integrating all her information. She self-corrects after checking meaning with visual information. So that was at level 5. And at level 6 on Cat and Dog, which she read with 99% accuracy, Kirsten made only a couple of substitutions, which looked much like the word on the page. Visually, the beginning and the ending was the same. There were even middle parts that were the same. And she did self-correct one error that was visually totally different and meant a completely different thing than the word on the page. So there are some strategies there that she's really using well. When she read Look for Me at level 5, benchmark book, so this was a cold book with only a small skeletal introduction, Kirsten read at 93% accuracy. In this reading, she substituted a couple of strange things. She said looked for looked. She inserted the word in and didn't correct it. She tried to sound out the word chimney and didn't get there, so I told her the word. She's rereading some to self-correct. She's predicting words that make sense but don't necessarily look right. However, she's able to answer questions about the book, about details in the book, literal information, and a little bit of inferred information. A little bit more on Kirsten so I can really think about her strategies. When she read Dave's tricks, level 6, she made quite a few errors. She's trying to use visual information, but she doesn't know enough about the middles of the words yet to be able to really read carefully, so she makes her most meaningful prediction. She does reread to self-correct when she realizes that her words aren't matching visually. And finally, in Pat's New Puppy, she's really at frustration level, and she's using everything she can, but she's having a very difficult time and has to do a lot of rereading, ends up making many errors that she leaves uncorrected. So when I look at her continuum then, under level C, I can say that Kirsten does recognize when the meaning isn't making sense. That's a habituated strategy for her. She could, as I recall her strategies last fall, she could recount sequence of events in her reading, and she was able to listen to stories and respond. By the way, when I mark Continua, I try to mark in conjunction with the teacher who has the child in the classroom. Since I'm a supplemental reading teacher, I'm supposed to be giving a second dose of reading instruction to the children. So it really makes a difference to have two teachers work together and check with each other. What I see might not necessarily be the same thing as what the classroom teacher sees a child doing in the classroom. So it's a really important double check if you have someone else who works with a child in reading to do this together. In terms of strategies, I have more evidence for strategies than for comprehension. I could say, I want to date, by the way, my bullets. Let me see. 1099. Before I go on the continuum, I'm going to read the next step on my directions so I don't get ahead of myself. I've just looked through the child's work samples to review the strategies that the child is using in an independent, secure, habituated way, that is without outside prompting. My next step, C, is to check and date the bullets under that letter on the continuum that describe the child's independent, secure, habituated strategies. And finally, on each strand line above the bullets, place an X and date the place on the continuum corresponding to most, all but one or two, of the bullets checked. Our reading continuum right now still asks to mark where on a line the child is doing their work. And so that's what I'm going to do for now. You can be assured, though, that this school year we'll be doing some revision on the reading continuum so that you'll only have to mark a box and you will mark the column which most accurately describes the child. I would like to see everyone in the district marking bullets and dating bullets, because we're becoming more and more concerned with accountability and making sure that the children are accomplishing the expectations that are spelled out in our core. So do date and mark the bullets when they have been mastered, and do mark on the continuum where the child is on the continuum at the end of the trimester. I'm going to progress down column C, and then I'll check and see if there's anything in level D that applies to Kirsten. In skills and strategies, I can say after looking at Kirsten's work that she used initial or final letter and sound to predict a word. So that was true about her. She located and read known words, sight words, so she had a lot of sight words when she was doing this reading. She had begun to use context, grammatical, or phonics cues. In fact, she was using all three, so I'm going to check that. She was able to match spoken words to words in print, so I'll mark that. She did stop at unknown words, which shows that she's monitoring her reading. She looked at print and pictures. She understood the difference between a sentence, word, and letter. Now, I'm not positive about that one. I'm going to leave that one blank right now. She did know the concepts of beginning, middle, and end, as I had discussed this with her teacher. Begins to read in phrases as opposed to word by word. She did not read in phrases at this point. I can recall Kirsten really working word by word as she was reading. Because, she did understand that print carries meaning. I forgot to mark that. Usually if a child has, if you've marked all of the bullets except for one or two, you can say, yes, that child should go in the middle of that column. I might move over here and check column D and see if there's anything additional, but right now I'm thinking that Kirsten would be squarely in the middle of column C. In terms of her attitudes and behaviors, we will be drawing up a checklist for this area on our revision of the continuum. But Kirsten was willing to read. She focused on print, supported by pictures. She did vocalize when reading. And her teacher told me that at times she did not use appropriate listening behaviors, so I left that one blank at the first trimester last year when I was marking these continuums. So in marking, checking on level D strategies, Kirsten was able to predict what would happen next. Recalling main ideas and details, I'm going to guess that that was the case from her answers to some of those questions on the benchmark books, and that she was able to orally connect her own experiences to reading, because she did a lot of response in discussion after we finished reading books. So I would even mark that one. Okay, and so those should all be dated 1099, because this was last year. And I would date these 1099 and these. And going on, using word parts to read unknown words, like endings and so forth. It was not what I'd call a habituated behavior when she did those running records last fall, so I'm not going to mark that one. Her sight vocabulary was increasing, although you can see that goes all the way across. Increasing and refining use of context, grammatical, or phonics cues, she was still beginning that. I wouldn't say her use was very well developed, so I'm not going to mark that. She was beginning to use a variety of ways of cross-checking, and she was beginning to self-correct her errors. I wouldn't say she paused appropriately when reading orally, or that she used punctuation marks, so I wouldn't mark those bullets there. She did read familiar books, but independent selection of books to look at and read, her classroom teacher told me she never did that on her own. And she did participate in oral and shared reading of fiction and nonfiction. So marking and dating those bullets. And placing her on the continuum. For the first strand, I would put her solidly in the middle of column D. I'm just looking over here, and I don't see anything in column E that described Kirsten as she was at this time last year, 1099. Because she only has 3 bullets marked in this skills and strategies strand, I'm going to mark her solidly in level C, 1099. And because we still have a continuum for attitudes, I'm going to put her over in here, 1099, just keeping in mind that that's really a checklist and not really so much a continuum as the above are. Okay, so now I've marked the continuum, and I'm seeing that Kirsten is pretty much, well, she's in D for comprehension, she's in C for skills and strategies, and she's in D for attitudes and behavior. Because she's still got one area in which she's column C, that's what I'm going to use as the basis for my next step. And keep that in mind. The next step is marking the report card, progress toward the core. Remember that at the end of the school year, you will need to state that the child has or has not met the core expectations. So keep that in the back of your mind. At the end of the first trimester, a child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content for a given grade level if the child's reading strategies are described on the continuum at levels listed under the IP, M, or E column on the reading matrix. So for second grade, the IP, M, or E columns would be F, G, and H at the end of the school year. So that does not describe Kirsten at this point. I just found that because her skills and strategies were in column C, I'm thinking of her in that way on my reading matrix. So I'm going to read the next bullet. If a child's reading level as described on the continuum corresponds with the CP column of the reading matrix, it is up to the teacher to judge whether the child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content and to mark the first trimester box accordingly. So, if I think about Kirsten reading at level C, she's definitely in the CP category. I need to think, can she make adequate progress to be in level E and F for comprehension and skills and strategies by the end of the school year? So, E and F, this is where she needs to go. And as I recall, at this point in the fall of last year, her teacher and I were both very concerned that she might not be able to achieve the core standards by the end of the school year. And so we would have marked on the report card where it says, your child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content for this grade level in reading. I would have marked no for Kirsten. I'm going to go on and read to you what you do at the end of the second trimester and the third trimester, because you will be doing this eventually. So have a look at your outlines. Part B of marking the report card. At the end of the second trimester, a child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content for a given grade level if the child's reading strategies are described on the continuum at levels listed under the M or E column on the reading matrix. So that at the end of second trimester then, we would be able to automatically say yes if the child were already in either of these columns. No problem. If a child's reading level as described on the continuum corresponds with the IP column of the reading matrix, it is up to the teacher to judge whether the child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content and to mark the second trimester box accordingly. So this is really your judgment call. If the child is reading, if it's a second grader who's reading at level F, between level 17 and 22 on your reference guide, then you really have to decide, do you think that this child will be able to meet the core by the end of the school year? And if so, you're going to mark yes at the end of second trimester. If you think not, then you need to mark N. So it's really, that's your judgment, and it really helps to talk with your peers about this issue. And finally, at the end of third trimester, any child whose reading level is described on the continuum corresponds with the M or E column of the reading matrix. That's right there. We looked at them last for second trimester. Has met the core content in reading, and the teacher should mark that box yes. So on the report card, no problem. If their reading is somewhere in the M or E column, you can just say yes here for reading. However, if the child's reading level as described on the continuum corresponds with the CP or IP column of the reading matrix, the child has not met the core content in reading, and the box should be marked no. Okay, so if they're in any of those areas, this box here is going to be no for reading. One really important thing to keep in mind whenever you're marking this report card, I put asterisks after a number of those sections on marking the report card, because for any child who is not progressing satisfactorily toward meeting the core content, be sure to alert the child's parents. You should check the appropriate boxes under teacher recommendations, which is right here. Any of those strategies that you think are important, you need to let the parents know right away. And you should let the parents know how they can help. And also, do consider referring the child to your staff collaboration team right away. If there's any cause for concern, you really need to go there and see if there are any instructional changes that you can make that would make a difference for the child. Let's move on to writing. Put that away. Okay, the first thing you'll need to do in writing is to gather samples or anecdotal notes of student work in writing, such as examples of response to literature, fast writes, and other pieces from writer's workshop, thank you notes, essays, and writing from science and social studies that clearly demonstrate the student's writing skills and strategies. Unfortunately for Kirsten, since I'm a supplemental reading teacher, and that's where my focus is, I don't have a lot of writing that I've collected for her, and I was not able to get hold of her portfolio. So the writing samples that I have are very limited, and they're actually after the first trimester. So I used those samples to kind of review what Kirsten was doing in her writing. The first step in marking the writing continuum is to look through the child's work samples. So I'm just going to have a look through here and think about what Kirsten was doing in her writing. And this was actually in November and December of last school year. That should help me, though, to know what she was doing a little earlier, too. When I look at this sentence that she wrote, I'd sleep with my mom. It was a response to literature, and she did have help on this. What I notice about Kirsten's writing here is that she's made some corrections to make more lowercase letters, but she still has mixed cases in her letters. She does habitually use spaces between her words and uses punctuation. I'm sure that the apostrophe on I'd is something that she added with a little bit of help from her friends. Okay, that was on November 18th of last year, and here's something that she wrote for me on November the 23rd, which indicates a little bit more of her own work. I had a witch mask for trick-or-treating, and what I see here is the use of mostly lowercase letters, occasional uppercase letters, spaces between her words, which is great, and punctuation, but not all of the middle sounds are under control, and the TR, the digraph at the beginning of trick or treat, is not in place. She's writing crike or creeting. And there's a silent E there that wouldn't make sense in the end of trick. So she hasn't quite got all of her sound correspondences in place yet. On December 7th, I like the part that says, I've got my big toe, I've got my big toe. Kirsten was trying to write cursive before she really had her handwriting together in manuscript. There are still a lot of capital letters mixed in with lowercase, but again, she's got her spaces between her words. Most everything is pretty phonetic. And she could have gotten some of that out of the book. That's true. The last piece that I have for Kirsten was, I will have a tree house in the woods. And I know she had help on this word tree. However, Kirsten was starting to get some conventional spellings down. So I wouldn't doubt it that have would have been in place, or house. Woods is missing some sounds there that if she'd said it slowly and really listened, she probably would have been able to figure out a little bit more. So let's look at the writing continuum. Or let's backtrack to our directions first and then look at the writing continuum. Part 2 for marking the continuum is, for each strand of the continuum, check and date the bullets that describe the child's independent, secure, habituated strategies. So yes, you do need to mark the bullets and you need to date them. And you do need to do that at second trimester too, because that helps you to know and document the child's progress toward the core. Remember that an independent, secure, habituated strategy is one that the child uses without reminders from any outside person. So, let's read the last direction before I get started. In the box at the bottom of the continuum, place the letter indicating the column of the continuum where the child has habituated most, all but one or two of the listed strategies. So looking at the primary writing continuum, I'm going to start with column C and see if most of this was true, and if not, I would go back a level and see if level B is true for her mostly. I'll start at C. Kirsten, in second grade, communicates meaning with pictures supported by words. Definitely, she was more worried about the words at this point even than the pictures, so that's okay. Begins to talk about ideas for writing. In our reading group, she was always able to speak her idea before she wrote it, so I'm going to check that off. Begins to write a complete thought. I saw that in every one of her response to literature pieces. Participates in interactive writing, and those pieces were written interactively. So I'm going to check that off. She's aware that print carries a consistent message. She definitely was. She was doing a little bit of writing on her own without me checking in with her. So I'd say that all of those bullets were true for Kirsten. And 1099. I'm going to go down the column and go to conventions and see if these were true or not, and then I'll move over one column and see what applied to her. Writing a simple sentence is something that Kirsten could habitually control. Shows awareness of punctuation. I'm going to mark that because of the consistency of periods at the end of her sentences. Generally writes left to right, top to bottom. That was true of Kirsten, as I can recall her. Begins to write some recognizable, understandable words, and that was true of most of the words in her writing. It's decipherable. She attempts phonetic invented spelling using consonant beginning and or ending sounds. She's actually beyond beginning and ending sounds because she's getting a lot of the middles. And she may have spaces between words. Yep. Begins to use lowercase letters, and that was true. So 1099. And now I'm going to move on to column D. See if this is true of Kirsten from the writing that I'm looking at and thinking about now. Begins to include multiple ideas or events. I remember talking with her teacher and her teacher telling me that she got down the minimal amount and that was it. And I don't feel that I can check that one off from what I recall of our conversations. With input is able to select topics to write about. And both of us had experiences on a regular basis where we talked to Kirsten and she would come up with an idea and begin to write. So I'm going to check that one. Communicates ideas in writing supported by pictures. As you can see, all of that was solid writing. There weren't any pictures with those pieces. Writes multiple sentences, often patterned sentences. That was not true of Kirsten at the time. And developing an awareness of audience. Kirsten didn't really write for an audience. She just wrote because she wrote only when she had to do it for class or for my group. So I'm not going to check that one either. Moving down to conventions. Uses capitals and lowercase correctly some of the time. Well, I could check that off. Attempts to use punctuation, and she did. Usually uses spaces between words. Yup. Represents most letter sounds in spelling, including some vowels. That was true. So I'm going to date those 1099. Looking good in conventions. Needs a little work on ideas and content. I'm going to move over one more column and see if there are any of these bullets that would apply. Begins to support own ideas with reasons. No. I know that about this girl. At the time, a year ago, she was not there. Begins to write for an audience beyond self. That was not the case. Begins to write in a variety of forms. She only did that when she was made to do that in her classroom, as I can recall. So I'm not checking that one off. Begins to organize writing. Not really. Notices when writing doesn't make sense or sound right. That she would do when she would read her work over. She would notice that. But she didn't always read it over. I'm not going to mark that one after all because she didn't always read her work over. So let's go down to conventions and see if any of these bullets apply. Begins to attend to dictionary spelling. Yes, she did that. Have was spelled correctly. Writes legibly. True. Uses capitals and lowercase letters appropriately most of the time. I don't think so. I still see a big mix. I'm not going to mark that one. Uses conventions appropriately some of the time. Well, yes. And writes complete sentences. From what I've seen here, I should say yes. So that's all but one. So I'm going to put 1099 for those. I'm looking over here, just skimming over. I don't see anything there that really applies. So coming down to the bottom on the continuum, I'm going to put my name, and I'm going to put, this was 1099. For ideas and content, I'm going to put her in level C. And for conventions, I'm going to put her in level E because it's all but one or two, and she definitely had most of her bullets there. So C and E is where I'd mark her on her continuum. And then I would also mark the attitudes checklist. but I'm not going to do that at this moment. The last step on here that we need to talk about is marking the report card in writing, progress toward the core. And again, remember that at the end of the school year, you are going to have to state that the child has or has not met the core expectations. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're marking. We're going to mark Kirsten's report card, thinking about her as if it were the end of the first trimester. So think about this. A child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content for a given grade level if the child's writing strategies are described on the continuum at levels listed under the IP, M, or E column on the writing matrix. This writing matrix is a draft. Some of us have looked over it and it looks pretty good so far, but we're only going to be able to finalize it as people start to use it. So remember, it's a work in progress, and don't be too critical. Let us have a chance to try it out. As I look at the continuum, and I see that in ideas and content, Kirsten was at level C, and in convention, she was at E. As a second grader, if I were only considering conventions, I would say she meets. However, I'm going to take the lowest of the two, which is ideas and content, and I'm going to call her put her in the CP column. Okay, so that first bullet did not apply, so I'm not going to be able to mark yes on the report card. And I just want to double check by reading down here. If a child's writing level as described on the continuum corresponds with the CP column of the writing matrix, it is up to the teacher to judge whether the child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content and to mark the first trimester box accordingly. From what I see and from what I recall about Kirsten, if I were marking this report card right now, I would say no, she doesn't, she's not making satisfactory progress toward the core, even though she does in her use of conventions. Her ideas and content needed a lot of development, and I think spending more time on her writing would have made a lot of difference. But she was a minimal time writer and only did what was minimally required. So I wouldn't be able to mark yes for her at the end of first trimester. Okay, let's think about if it were the second or the third trimester, and we were marking Kirsten's writing. At the end of the second trimester, just as in the reading, a child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content for a given grade level if the child's writing strategies are described on the continuum at levels listed under the M or E column on the writing matrix. So having a look at that, M or E for whatever grade level you're in, then you can mark your box as a yes at the end of second trimester. If a child's writing level as described on the continuum corresponds with the IP column of the writing matrix, it's up to the teacher to judge whether the child is satisfactorily progressing toward meeting the core content and to mark the second trimester box accordingly. So it's really up to you. You just have to go on your best hunches. Do you think that the child is going to be able to do most of the strategies that are listed on the writing continuum, and do you think that the child will have a fully developed handle on ideas and content for their grade level by the time they finish the school year? And if so, you can mark yes. Finally, at the end of the second trimester, if a child's reading level, as described on the continuum, corresponds with the CP column of the writing matrix, mark the reading box no. So it's up to you to decide for this area, but if this child is in the CP column, then you have to mark no. And then we come to the end of the school year in writing, and at that time, any child whose writing level as described on the continuum corresponds with the M or E column of the writing matrix has met the core content in writing, and the teacher should mark that box yes. So right there you get to put a Y. If the child's writing level as described on the continuum corresponds with the CP or IP column of the writing matrix, the child has not met the core content in writing in either of these columns here, and the box should be marked no. And again, As before, for any child who's not progressing satisfactorily toward meeting the core content, be sure to alert the child's parents as soon as possible, and check those boxes in the teacher recommendation area. Let the parents know how they can help, and consider referring the child to your SCOTS team if you have serious concerns about the child meeting those core standards. Okay, well, you've got a lot of work to look at and a lot of steps to take care of as you're marking both Continua and report cards. But within not very long, I'm sure it'll be second nature to all of us, and it'll be habituated for us as well. And it'll be a lot easier for us all to know how well a child is progressing toward the core if we're really quantifying and qualifying the child's strategies and skills as they're working towards actualizing their own potential here in school.